The gavel came down like a crack of thunder, the sound echoing through the wood-paneled chamber of the HOA boardroom. It was a sound meant to signify finality, absolute authority. But all I heard was a starter's pistol. The man wielding it, HOA President Bill Dankworth, allowed a thin reptilian smile to stretch across his florid face. The motion to commence expedited foreclosure on the property at 1712 Sentinel Ridge passes unanimously. You have 72 hours to vacate. The smell of his cheap cologne, something cloying and aquatic, mixed with the dusty scent of old law books on the shelves, filled my nostrils. My wife Sarah gasped beside me, her hand a cold, trembling bird in mine. Dankworth's eyes, the color of faded denim, didn't flicker with triumph or malice. They were empty. That was the most terrifying part. He wasn't a mustache-twirling villain. He was a bureaucrat, a functionary, and he was about to make us homeless for a row of petunias. 72 hours. The memory hit me like a flashbang, white-hot and disorienting. It was just 3 weeks ago. The smell of freshly cut St. Augustine, grass, and the distant rhythmic thump of a sprinkler system had filled the humid North Carolina evening. I was on the back deck, the treated pine still warm from the sun, savoring the quiet that only comes after 2 decades of controlled chaos. The kind of quiet you earn. Sarah was humming inside, the soft clatter of dinner plates a domestic symphony. Our new beginning. Our forever home in the quiet, master-planned community of Serenity Meadows. The illusion shattered with the aggressive crunch of tires on our pea-gravel driveway. A silver Lincoln SUV, so polished it hurt to look at in the late afternoon sun, came to a halt. The door opened and a woman in khaki capris and a blindingly white polo shirt emerged. She moved with a pinched, officious energy, a clipboard held to her chest like a shield. This was Brenda Hoagland, Serenity Meadows' head of architectural compliance. We'd met her once, during closing. Her handshake had been dry and firm, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice a nasally monotone. "Lovely evening." "It was," I said, not moving from my leaning position against the deck rail. A lifetime of assessing threats had my internal alarms pinging, low but persistent. It was the way her eyes scanned everything but me. The roofline, the gutter guards, the flower beds Sarah had spent all weekend planting. "I'm here about a violation." She held up the clipboard. "Regulation 14B, subsection 2. Unapproved. Flora in the front yard berm." I just stared. "I'm sorry, the what?" "The berm. The gently sloping mound of earth between the sidewalk and the street. Your wife has planted petunias." She said the word like it was a contagious disease. From the kitchen window, Sarah heard. She came out, wiping her hands on a dish towel, a warm smile on her face. "Brenda, hi! Aren't they gorgeous? The burpy night sky variety. They look like little galaxies." Brenda's face didn't soften. "The approved plant list for berms is limited to dwarf mondo grass, liriope, or approved decorative gravel. No annuals. They're deemed non-uniform." Sarah's smile faltered. "But they're just flowers. Everyone on the street has something different." "And they will be receiving notices as well," Brenda said crisply, pen scratching on her form. "You have 48 hours to remove them and return the berm to compliance. Failure to do so will result in a fine of $100 per day per plant." I pushed off the railing. The motion was calm, controlled, but something in my posture made Brenda take a half step back. 20 years as a Navy SEAL teaches you to harness your presence, to make it a tool or a weapon. Right now, it was a warning flare. "You're fining us for flowers." "For non-compliance," she corrected, her eyes flicking to my arms, to the faded trident tattoo on my forearm. "The covenants are very clear. A copy was provided at closing. Aesthetics are property values. Property values are the lifeblood of Serenity Meadows." I could have recited the UCMJ by heart. I could chart a course by the stars, disable an IED with a paper clip, and hold my breath for 5 minutes underwater. But I hadn't read the HOA covenants. That was my first mistake. My second was letting my temper, a cold, silent thing I usually kept locked in a deep, dark box, rattle its chains. "The flowers stay," I said, my voice low. Brenda's lips tightened. "That's your choice. The fines will accrue. And just so you know, persistent violators can be subject to liens and, ultimately, foreclosure proceedings." She delivered this last part with a chilling matter-of-factness, then turned on her heel and marched back to her Lincoln, kicking up a cloud of dust as she sped away. Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fear. Foreclosure? For petunias? I put my arm around her, pulling her close. The scent of her shampoo, coconut, and vanilla grounded me. "It's a bluff, sweetheart. A power trip. They can't do that." I was sure of it. This was America. They couldn't take your home because of a few flowers. I was wrong. The fines started the next day. Official notices arrived on crisp, watermarked paper, emblazoned with the HOA seal. Each one was a masterpiece of bureaucratic language, designed to confuse and intimidate. We ignored them. A week later, a second notice arrived. This one certified. Mail. The fines had doubled. "Failure to remediate constitutes willful disregard." Sarah wanted to pay it. "It's $2,000, Ben. It's insane, but it's not worth the fight." But it was. It was never about the money. It was about the principle. It was about a bully testing your boundaries. I'd seen it in every hellhole around the world. Give a petty tyrant an inch, and they'll take your entire life. "No," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "We're not paying." That's when the phone calls started. Blocked numbers, silent hangs-ups at 2 in the morning, then the accidents. One morning, we found our newspaper soaked in gasoline. Another day, a large, anonymous bag of fast food trash was dumped on our porch, the greasy contents strewn across the welcome mat Sarah's mother had needle-pointed for us. The escalation was deliberate, a campaign of psychological warfare. I knew the patterns. Isolate the target. Create a constant state of low-grade anxiety. Make them doubt themselves. I'd done it to high-value targets myself. But this wasn't a terrorist compound in the Hindu Kush. This was Serenity Meadows. Began my own reconnaissance. Bill Dankworth, the HOA president, was a retired mortgage broker. He lived 3 streets over in a house with perfect, sterile landscaping, not a single blade of grass out of place. He drove a spotless Cadillac and held board meetings in his garage every Sunday afternoon with his inner circle. Brenda, a slimy lawyer named Carl, and a few other busybodies. They were a small, insulated group who'd weaponized the bylaws. Most HOA boards are run by a small, unchecked clique. They often don't represent the majority of homeowners, but they control the meetings, the votes, and the money. Absolute power, corrupting absolutely. I started attending the monthly HOA meetings. They were held in a sterile community clubhouse that smelled of chlorine from the adjacent pool and stale coffee. I sat in the back, saying nothing, just observing. Dankworth presided with a smug, paternalistic air. Homeowners who dared to question fines or rules were talked down to, belittled, and ultimately silenced with a gavel slam and a "the matter is closed." I saw him do it to an elderly man named Mr. Gable, whose wife was dying of cancer. He'd put up a small, tasteful wind chime on his back porch because the sound soothed her. Dankworth fined him for unauthorized auditory emissions. The old man's face, etched with grief and exhaustion, crumpled. He just nodded meekly and left. That was the moment my cold anger turned into a molten core of purpose. This wasn't just about us anymore. I began digging. Really digging. I filed requests to see the HOA's financials, their reserve studies, their insurance policies. I was met with obfuscation, delays, and outright refusal. Brenda Hoagland became my shadow. I'd catch her sitting in her Lincoln at the end of our street, binoculars trained on our house. One afternoon, I came home to find Sarah in tears. She'd been gardening in the back, well away from the forbidden berm, when Brenda had marched into our backyard, uninvited, and started taking pictures of our patio furniture, claiming the cushions were non-conforming. She just walked. "Right in, Ben! Like she owned the place!" Sarah sobbed, her hands dirty from the soil. I held her, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about property. It was about personhood, about sovereignty. My home was my castle, and they were laying siege to it. The next day, I went to the county courthouse. I spent 8 hours in the records room, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, just following. The instincts that had kept me alive on 100 missions. Find the weakness, the flaw in the design. And I found it. A gold mine. Many HOAs are built on a stack of legal documents, but the original covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, filed with the county are the supreme law. Any bylaw or rule passed later that contradicts them is unenforceable. Buried in the original CC&Rs for Serenity Meadows, filed in 1985, was a clause that made my heart skip a beat. It stated that any amendment to the architectural guidelines required a 75% majority vote of all homeowners, not just those present. At a meeting, Dankworth's approved plant list had been created by a simple board vote in 2015. It was completely illegal. I had them. I had the silver bullet. I made copies, had them notarized, and prepared my case. I would go to the next meeting and dismantle their entire corrupt empire piece by piece in front of everyone. The victory felt inevitable, a tactical certainty. I was so focused on the legal battlefield that I never saw the ambush coming on the personal one. It was a Tuesday. Sarah had gone to the grocery store. I was in my basement office, compiling my evidence into a devastating presentation, when my phone buzzed. It was a neighbor, her voice frantic. "Ben, you need to get to the community entrance. Now." "It's Sarah. There's some kind of trouble." I didn't remember getting in my truck. The world became a blur of green and sunshine. I screeched to a halt at the stone pillars that marked the entrance to Serenity Meadows. A small crowd had gathered, and in the center of it all was my wife. Sarah was on her knees on the hot asphalt, weeping. Her grocery bags were torn open, a mess of broken eggs, spilled milk, and canned goods scattered around her. Standing over her were Bill Dankworth and Brenda Hoagland. Dankworth had a look of cold satisfaction. Brenda held a digital camera, snapping pictures of the mess like it was a crime scene. But it was the third figure that turned the world red. Hulking man in a cheap security uniform I'd never seen before, one of Dankworth's special compliance officers, had Sarah's arm twisted behind her back. His knee was in her spine, pinning her down. His face was a mask of brutish concentration. The sound that came out of my mouth wasn't human. It was the roar of a predator whose mate has been touched. The security guard's head snapped up. He saw me coming, my face a thundercloud of lethal intent. His eyes went wide with a primal fear he probably didn't even understand. He let go of Sarah's arm and scrambled back, fumbling for the canister of pepper spray on his belt. He never got it out. The gavel slammed down, bringing me back to the boardroom. The foreclosure was approved. My home was being taken. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the image burned into my retina. My wife, my heart, broken and humiliated on the ground. Bill Dankworth leaned forward, his cheap con now smelling like victory. "The board has spoken. Get off my property." I looked at him. I looked at the guard who was now smirking by the door. I looked at Brenda, preening over her clipboard, and I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," I said. my voice so quiet they had to lean in to hear it. You just declared war on a force you can't comprehend. You didn't take my home today. I stood up, the chair scraping behind me. I helped Sarah to her feet, her body shaking against mine. You just signed your surrender, I said. You just assaulted the wife of a Navy SEAL. Game on. The room fell silent. The smirk vanished from the guard's face. Dankworth's confidence flickered for the first time, a crack in the facade. 72 hours. That's all they'd given me. It was more than enough time to dismantle their entire world. The smell of antiseptic and bleach in the urgent care clinic was a stark, sterile contrast to the humid green scent of betrayal outside. It clung to the back of my throat. Sarah sat on the paper-covered examination table, her shoulders hunched, a large ice pack pressed to her wrist. The skin was already blooming into a vicious purple and blue bouquet. Each color was a testament to that rent-a-cop's grip. Her tears had dried, leaving pale tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She wouldn't look at me. The shame was a physical force in the room, thick and suffocating. My fault. I'd been so focused on the legal endgame, on outmaneuvering them on their own bureaucratic battlefield, that I'd left my most vital asset exposed. In the teams, we never let a teammate isolate. I'd broken the most fundamental rule. The young. Doctor finished his notes, his expression carefully neutral. The wrist is badly sprained, not broken. Lots of soft tissue bruising on her arm and back. Rest, ice, compression. I'm prescribing a mild painkiller. He glanced at me, then quickly away, sensing the storm barely contained within my calm exterior. She was assaulted? Yes, I said, the word a flat, hard stone. He nodded, swallowing. The police have been notified. I lied smoothly. They hadn't, not yet. Calling the local PD who probably golfed with Dankworth would be a tactical error. It would tip my hand, let them control the narrative. Right now, they thought I was just a pissed-off veteran. They had no idea they were dealing with a strategist. The first rule of warfare: never let your enemy know your capabilities. I helped Sarah into the truck, her movements slow and pained. The drive home was silent, the only sound the hum of the tires on asphalt. The manicured lawns and perfect flower beds of Serenity Meadows now looked like a beautiful, poisonous facade. A gilded cage with Dankworth as the warden. We pulled into our driveway, and the sight of our home, the one they were trying to steal, sent a fresh wave of cold fury through me. This was my hill. They had chosen to die on it. I got Sarah settled on the couch with a blanket, a glass of water, and her pills. I knelt before her, taking her good hand in mine. Her skin was cold. Look at me, Sarah. She finally met my eyes. The fear in them was being slowly replaced by a hard, glinting anger. Good. Anger I could work with. Fear would paralyze us. This stops now, I said, my voice low and steady. They touched you. That was their last mistake. They think they've won. They think we're beaten. They have no idea what's coming. What are you going to do, Ben? She whispered, her voice raw. What I was trained to do, I said. I'm going to conduct a multi-front assault on every aspect of their operation. Legal, financial, and psychological. They won't see it coming until their entire world is collapsing around them. I went down to the basement, my command center. The scent of drywall and sawdust from the unfinished room was a familiar, comforting smell. It was a blank slate, a place for planning. I pinned a large map of Serenity Meadows to the wall. I started creating files. One for Dankworth, one for Brenda, one for the lawyer, Carl, one for the security thug, whose name I'd learned was Keith Mullins. I began connecting them with strings, building a web of their corruption. My first move was information warfare. In most states, HOAs are required by law to make all financial records, meeting minutes, and vendor contracts available for homeowner inspection upon written request. They can charge a reasonable copying fee, but they cannot refuse. Dankworth's refusal to show me the books wasn't just arrogance. It was illegal. I knew why. Rats always hide their nests. I didn't request them again. That would be expected. Instead, I became a ghost. Under the cover of darkness, dressed in dark, nondescript clothing, I began my reconnaissance. I noted the patterns of the actual county security patrols, which were minimal, versus Dankworth's private compliance goon, Mullins, who drove a predictable, lazy circuit in his white golf cart, stopping to harass anyone out after 9 p.m. I followed Brenda Hoagland. She had a routine: grocery store on Tuesdays, a long lunch at a cheap Italian chain with other HOA busybodies on Wednesdays, and every Thursday night she went to a Yoga for Serenity class at the community clubhouse for 2 hours. Her house was a testament to her own hypocrisy. While her Lincoln was parked in the driveway, a quick glance through her side gate revealed a backyard littered with bags of her own lawn clippings, a clear violation of the community's no visible yard waste policy. I took pictures. Evidence of a double standard was a powerful demoralizer, but Dankworth was the priority. His house was a fortress of conformity, but everyone has a vulnerability. His was his garbage. On trash night, I waited until the rumble of the truck was a street over. I moved quickly, a shadow in the pre-dawn gloom. The smell of his discarded coffee grounds and rotting fruit filled the air as I lifted the lid of his recycling bin. Bingo. Bank statements, credit card offers, shredded documents. It was the intelligence goldmine. I bagged it all. It's shocking what people throw away. Dumpster diving for discarded information, while messy, is generally legal as once trash is placed on a public curb for collection, it is considered abandoned property, and there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. It's a classic counterintelligence tactic. Dankworth's carelessness was about to become my greatest weapon. Back in the basement, wearing latex gloves, I pieced together his shredded documents like a jigsaw puzzle. It was tedious, methodical work. The reward was worth it. I found credit card statements showing lavish dinners at expensive steakhouses, all dated on the same days as vague vendor meetings in the HOA minutes. I found a half-shredded invoice from a company called Premier Landscaping for a massive amount of work at Dankworth's personal residence, a company I'd never seen working anywhere in Serenity Meadows. A quick search of state business. Records showed Premier Landscaping was owned by one William Dankworth. He was paying himself from the HOA's coffers. Embezzlement. Beautiful, provable, felony embezzlement. The sun was coming up. I had him. But taking him down legally would be a slow process. The 72-hour clock was ticking. I needed something faster, something that would apply immediate and unbearable pressure. I needed to turn the community against him. I spent the day making copies, not of the financial crimes, that was my ace in the hole. I made copies of the original CCNRs, highlighting the clause about the 75% vote. I made copies of the photos of Brenda's messy backyard. I wrote a simple, devastating letter. It didn't scream or rage, it stated facts. Fellow homeowner, it began. Did you know the HOA's approved plant list was enacted illegally? Did you know they have no legal authority to fine you for non-compliance with it? Did you know that while they harass you for a stray weed, board member Brenda Hoagland violates the rules she enforces? See attached. Our board operates outside the law. It's time we held them accountable. I didn't sign it. It was from a concerned neighbor. I hand-delivered a copy to every mailbox in Serenity Meadows, under the cover of the next night's rain. The water soaking through my jacket, the ink smudging just enough to look clandestine. The patter of the rain on the mailboxes was the only sound, a perfect acoustic cover for my operation. The effect was electric. By noon the next day, the community Facebook page was on fire. Posts were popping up, people sharing stories of their own petty fines and harassments. The dam of fear had broken. Dankworth's carefully cultivated empire of quiet compliance was suddenly buzzing with open rebellion. I saw neighbors talking in hushed, angry clusters at the end of their driveways. I saw Brenda Hoagland speed through the neighborhood, her face pale and panicked, no longer stopping to inspect berms. My phone rang. It was Dankworth. His voice, usually so smug, was tight with barely controlled rage. "Callahan, I know it was you. This slander stops now. You retract this filth, or I will bury you." "It's not slander if it's true, Bill," I said calmly, watching the rain streak down my window. "And I'd be very careful about your next move. You're standing on a trap door, and I have the lever." He hung up on me. "Good. Let him be emotional. Let him make a mistake." His mistake came faster than I expected. That afternoon, a certified letter arrived. It was from the HOA's lawyer, Carl Mendelson. It cited a dozen new absurd violations, a crack in our driveway pavement deemed a tripping hazard, our mailbox being a half-degree off true vertical, the shade of our shutters not matching the original community aesthetic. The fines were astronomical, totaling over $50,000. The cover letter stated that due to the egregious and willful nature of the violations, the 72-hour foreclosure timeline was being moved up. We had until noon the next day to pay in full or vacate. It was a blatant, desperate power play. They were trying to shock and awe me into submission. They were trying to make me spend my final hours packing, not fighting. Sarah read the letter, her face ashen. "Ben, they can't do this, can they?" "No," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "They can't. This is perfect." "Perfect? How is this perfect?" "Because they've just shown their hand," I said, tapping the lawyer's letter. "They're panicking, they're overreaching, and in their panic, they've given me exactly what I need." "What?" "A credible threat of immediate, irreversible harm. It's the key component for a temporary restraining order." I went back to my computer. I drafted the legal filing myself. My time in the teams involved more than just kicking. Down doors. We were often tasked with sensitive site exploitation, which meant understanding foreign legal systems to gather evidence that would stand up in a military tribunal. This wasn't that different. I cited their illegal bylaws, the embezzlement evidence I'd gathered, the assault on Sarah, and this new, threatening letter. I requested an emergency TRO to halt all foreclosure proceedings and to bar Dankworth, Hoagland, and Mullins from having any contact with us or approaching our property. I filed it electronically with the county court and served the papers to Dankworth, Brenda, and their lawyer by certified mail. The process server later told me Dankworth had opened the door, taken the envelope, and turned so red the server thought he was having a coronary. The clock kept ticking. The next morning, the eve of our supposed eviction, was tense and quiet. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and steaming. The community was holding its breath. I was a coiled spring, waiting for the judge's ruling. My phone rang. It was an unknown number with a local area code. "Mr. Callahan?" a woman's voice asked, crisp and professional. "This is Martha Gable." It took me a second to place the name. Mr. Gable. The elderly man with the dying wife and the wind chime. "Yes, Martha." "How is your husband? How is Evelyn?" There was a pause. "Evelyn passed last night, Mr. Callahan. She died at home, listening to her wind chime." Her voice broke, then firmed. "The HOA sent a cease and desist letter about the chime this morning. By certified mail." The cold fury in my veins turned to ice. There were no words. This was beyond corruption. This was a profound, human evil. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Martha," I said, my voice thick. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," she replied, her voice gaining a steely resolve I hadn't heard before. "Do. My husband is broken, but I'm not. I was the comptroller for a Fortune 500 company for 40 years. I've been going through the HOA financials you posted online. Ben, it's so much worse than you think. My heart hammered against my ribs. How? The embezzlement is just the tip of the iceberg. They've been underfunding the capital reserves for years. The roof on the clubhouse needs replacing next year. The reserve fund has about 10% of what it should. There's a special assessment coming that will bankrupt half the retirees in this community. And it's all been covered up by falsified reserve studies. Dankworth and his cronies have been looting this place for a decade. They were always going to foreclose on someone to create a crisis, to divert attention from the financial abyss. You were just the unlucky ones who gave them the excuse. The scope of it all crashed down on me. This wasn't just about power. It was about greed on a massive scale. They weren't just bullies. They were financial terrorists holding an entire community hostage. HOA reserve funds are not petty cash. They are legally mandated savings accounts for major repairs. Board members who intentionally underfund them or divert the money for other purposes can be held personally liable for the shortfall and can face serious criminal charges for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Martha Gable had just handed me the tactical nuke. Martha, can you get me those documents? The real financials? The falsified reports? I already have them, she said. Evelyn, she made me promise to fight. She loved the sound of that chime. We arranged to meet. The plan was coming together. The TRO was my shield. Martha's evidence was my sword. I had them in a pincer movement. All I had to do was wait for the judge's ruling, then unleash hell at the emergency HOA meeting. Dankworth had been forced to call for that evening to address the unfounded homeowner concerns. I was putting on a clean shirt, preparing for the showdown, when I heard the sound of tires on the gravel again. Not one car, several, and the distinct electronic squawk of a police radio. My blood ran cold. It was a sound I knew all too well. I walked to the front window. 2 county sheriff's cruisers were in my driveway, their light bars dark, but their presence ominous. Behind them was Dankworth's Cadillac and Brenda's Lincoln. Standing next to the lead cruiser was Deputy Keith Mullins, the security guard, now in a full county sheriff's deputy's uniform. He was pointing at my house, talking to a senior-looking officer. The pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. Mullins wasn't just a rent-a-cop, he was a real cop. Off-duty, working a security gig for his friend Dankworth. He'd assaulted my wife while representing himself as law enforcement. The senior officer, a sergeant with a weary face, walked to my door and knocked. I opened it. "Benjamin Callahan?" he asked. "Yes, Sergeant. We've received a complaint, a serious one. Your neighbor, Mr. Dankworth, alleges you've been making violent threats against him and his family. He says you threatened to, and I quote, use your SEAL training to disappear him. Given your background, sir, we have to take this seriously." I looked past him. Dankworth was leaning against his car, arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on his face. He'd made the first move. He'd weaponized the law I was trying to use against him. He knew a TRO was coming. So he'd concocted a story, using his pet cop to get a jump on me. It was a brilliant, malicious checkmate. The sergeant's hand rested near his sidearm. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come down to the station with us to answer some questions." 72 hours were almost up. The foreclosure was hours away. The emergency meeting was tonight. And now this. I looked at Sarah, her face a mask of fresh terror. I looked at Dankworth's smug face. The game had just changed. He hadn't just signed his surrender. He'd just launched a full-scale counteroffensive, and I was being taken off the battlefield. The sergeant's hand wasn't just near his sidearm. His fingers were casually hooked into his duty belt, thumb resting on the retention strap of his holster. A subtle, professional detail that screamed readiness. The smell of his starched uniform, of gun oil and stale coffee, mixed with the wet asphalt scent of the rain-soaked driveway. Keith Mullins, now in his full deputy's uniform, stood a few feet behind him, his chest puffed out, a look of vicious triumph in his eyes. This wasn't an inquiry. This was an extraction. "Violent threats?" I said, my voice calm, a flat lake hiding unimaginable depth. "You'll have to be more specific, Sergeant." "The allegation is that you threatened to use your military training to harm Mr. Dankworth and his family," the sergeant repeated, his eyes never leaving mine. He was good. He was assessing, not assuming. I allowed a small, cold smile. "And he waited until he had an audience to report it? Convenient." I glanced past him at Dankworth, who quickly looked away, suddenly interested in a cloud. "Sergeant, has it occurred to you that a man facing an emergency restraining order and a mountain of financial fraud allegations might have a motive to fabricate stories about his accuser?" The sergeant's eyes flickered. Just a fraction. I'd planted the seed. "My job is to investigate the complaint in front of me, sir. Now, are you going to come willingly, or is this going to get difficult?" From the doorway, Sarah made a small, terrified sound. That was the pressure point. My willingness to comply wasn't about me, it was about her. I couldn't let her see me dragged away in cuffs. That image would break her. "I'll come," I said, my voice dropping so only the sergeant could hear. "But you might want to ask Deputy Mullins over there why he was performing an illegal citizen's arrest on my wife while off duty and out of jurisdiction, and whether that assault might also constitute a motive for creative storytelling." The sergeant's head turned slowly toward Mullins. Mullins's smug grin vanished. "That's a separate issue, Sarge," Mullins blustered. "This is about the direct threat." "Noted," the sergeant said, his tone neutral. He turned back to me. "Let's go." I looked at Sarah, giving her a single, slow nod. It was a signal we'd used for years. It meant, trust the plan. Hold the line. Her eyes, wide with fear, narrowed in determination. She gave me a nearly imperceptible nod back. The ride to the county sheriff's office was silent. I didn't say a word, exercising the right every citizen, every warrior should. Never forget the right to remain silent. Never, ever talk to the police without a lawyer present. Even innocent statements can be twisted and used against you. Silence is not an admission of guilt. It is a strategic tool. They put me in an interview room that smelled of old sweat and lemon disinfectant. The walls were a grimy beige, the table bolted to the floor. I sat, relaxed my posture, and regulated my breathing. Slow inhale, hold, slow exhale. I was back in SEER school. This was just another interrogation. A waiting game. They left me there for 2 hours. A classic pressure tactic. Let the anxiety build. Let the imagination run wild. But my mind was a vault. I used the time to refine my strategy. Dankworth had overplayed his hand. By involving the police with a false report, he'd elevated the conflict to a new level. He'd committed a crime himself, and he'd given me a new, powerful ally, the truth. The door finally opened. It was the sergeant, and he didn't look happy. He held a file folder. "Your lawyer's here," he said gruffly. I hadn't called. A lawyer. I stood up as a man in an impeccably tailored suit walked in. He was in his 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a bearing that spoke of quiet, immense authority. It was Arthur Finch, a name I knew well, a former JAG Corps prosecutor who was now the most feared civil litigation attorney in 3 states. He was also the man who had handled the estate when I'd bought my house. We'd spoken exactly once. "Ben," he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, dry. "Don't say a word." He turned to the sergeant. "Sergeant, you have precisely 60 seconds to produce a sworn affidavit detailing the specific, actionable threat my client allegedly made, including time, date, and context. Or I walk him out of here and you can explain to your sheriff why you're being sued for false imprisonment." The sergeant's jaw tightened. The complainant is preparing that now. He's had hours, Finch said, his voice like silk over steel. The delay is suspect. In the meantime, I've filed a counter-complaint on behalf of Mrs. Callahan for assault and battery by Deputy Keith Mullins and against William Dankworth for filing a false police report. I've also just served your office with an emergency temporary restraining order, signed by Judge Henderson 10 minutes ago, halting all foreclosure proceedings against the Callahan property and barring Dankworth, Hoagland, and Mullins from any contact with my clients. He placed a copy of the TRO on the table. The sergeant picked it up, his eyes scanning the document. The room felt like it had just depressurized. My client is leaving with me, Finch stated. It wasn't a request. The sergeant looked from the TRO to Finch's unblinking gaze to my calm, silent presence. He was a man who understood leverage, and he had just lost all of his. The complaint is under review, the sergeant said, finally, the words tasting like ash. You're free to go, Mr. Callahan. Finch didn't move. I'll need that in writing. A signed statement that no charges are being filed and my client is released without any conditions. 15 minutes. Later, I walked out of the sheriff's office into the fading afternoon light, a piece of paper in my hand stating I was a free man. Arthur Finch walked beside me. How? I asked simply. Martha Gable called me, he said. Evelyn was my cousin. What Dankworth did to them, and to your wife. His face hardened. This ends tonight. I'll be at the emergency meeting. You have the evidence? I do. Good. Unleash it. The community clubhouse was packed. The air was thick with the smell of nervous sweat, cheap perfume, and a palpable, buzzing rage. Every chair was filled. People lined the walls, their faces etched with anger and a newfound hope. The buzz of 100 conversations died the moment Bill Dankworth gavelled the meeting to order. He looked pale, shaken. The sight of me walking, in free and clear, had clearly thrown him. Brenda Hoagland sat to his right, clutching her clipboard like a life preserver. Their lawyer, Carl Mendelsohn, was whispering furiously in Dankworth's ear. Dankworth cleared his throat, the microphone screeching with feedback. This meeting is called to address the unfounded rumors and hysterical accusations being spread by a handful of malcontents. I didn't wait for him to finish. I stood up. Point of order, Bill. The entire room swiveled to look at me. Dankworth's eyes bulged. You are out of order, Callahan. You're not on the agenda. The bylaws state any homeowner can address the board during the open forum period, I said, my voice amplified by the tense silence. And we're way past your agenda. Arthur Finch stood beside me, a silent pillar of legal menace. Dankworth saw him and visibly flinched. You have 2 minutes, Dankworth spat. I won't need that long, I said, walking toward the front. I pulled a thumb drive from my pocket. I think everyone deserves to see what their hard-earned HOA dues have been paying for. I plugged it into the clubhouse's large monitor. The first image that flashed up was the photo of Brenda's trash-strewn backyard. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Brenda shrank in her seat. Hypocrisy, I said simply. The first sign of a corrupt regime. Next, I displayed the original CC&R clause, highlighting the 75% rule. Your fines for petunias, for wind chimes, for the wrong shade of beige. Illegal. Unenforceable. The board has been lying to you and stealing from you for years. Dankworth was on his feet. This is slander. Mendelsohn, do something. The lawyer stood up. Mr. Callahan, I must advise you. Sit down, Carl. Arthur Finch's voice cut through the room like a whip. You're in enough trouble already. Carl Mendelsohn, looking suddenly very small, sat. I brought up the bank statements from Dankworth's trash, the dinners, the invoices from Premier Landscaping. I connected them to the HOA's financial records Martha Gable had provided, showing the payments to the same company. Embezzlement doesn't require complex schemes. Often it's brazen. Inflated invoices, payments to shell companies, reimbursements for personal expenses. Follow the money. It always leads back to the thief. The room was dead silent now. You could hear a pin drop. Then I unleashed the tsunami. I displayed the falsified reserve studies next to the real damning engineering reports Martha had unearthed. I showed the math. They've stolen your operating funds, and they've bankrupted your reserves. The roof on this very clubhouse needs replacing. The cost? Over $200,000. The reserve fund has $20,000. That means a special assessment is coming. A $20,000 bill for every single household in Serenity Meadows. Because of them! The silence shattered. The room erupted into a roar of pure, unadulterated fury. People were on their feet, shouting, shaking their fists. Dankworth was frantically banging his gavel, but the sound was swallowed by the tumult. It was then that the doors at the back of the clubhouse opened. Two men in suits walked in, their badges held high. The county district attorney and an investigator from the state's attorney general's office. Arthur Finch had made a few calls. William Dankworth, Brenda Hoagland, the DA said, his voice booming through the chaos. You are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and filing a false police report. He looked at Carl Mendelsohn. You should probably call your own lawyer, counselor. You're next. The look on Dankworth's face was one of utter, absolute annihilation. The cuffs clicked around his wrists, a sound far more final than any gavel slam. As they led him away, past the furious, jeering faces of his former subjects, he caught my eye. There was no fight left, just a hollow, broken shell. I turned to the crowd. The fight isn't over, I yelled, and the room quieted to hear me. They're gone, but the mess remains. We need to elect a new board tonight, one that represents us, one that will work to fix this. A voice shouted, I nominate Ben Callahan. The roar of approval was deafening. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. 1 month later, the for sale sign went up in front of Dankworth's house. The bank owned it. The proceeds were being added to the HOA's restitution fund. Keith Mullins had been fired from the sheriff's department and was facing criminal charges of his own. Brenda Hoagland and Carl Mendelsohn had cut plea deals, singing like canaries about Dankworth's operations in exchange for lighter sentences. The petunias on our berm bloomed violently, a riot of purple and white against the green. Sarah's wrist had healed. The wind chime on Old Man Gable's porch played a soft, melodic tune in the evening breeze, a sound now protected by a new bylaw, the first one passed by the new board. I stood on my deck, the wood warm under my bare feet. The smell of grilled steak and Sarah's gardenias filled the air. The community wasn't perfect. The financial road ahead was long and hard, but it was ours again. The siege was over. The victory wasn't in the arrests or the foreclosures. It was in the quiet, the peace we'd earned back. It was in the sound of a neighbor laughing next door, unafraid of a fine for excessive merriment. It was in the sovereignty of our own homes. They had assaulted my wife, threatened my home, and tried to break me. They had no idea that a Navy SEAL's true weapon isn't his strength or his skill. It's his unwavering belief that no one gets left behind. And in Serenity Meadows, we had just brought everyone home. This wasn't just my story. It's a battle, happening in neighborhoods everywhere. Where are you watching from? Comment your city below. Let me see how far this problem reaches. Have you ever stood up to an HOA bully? Tell me your story in the comments. If you believe that no one, not even an HOA board, is above the law, hit that subscribe button, because your story could be next, and together we can hold every single one of them accountable.